I've been playing in the same Dwarf Fortress world since the game came out on Steam 2 years ago, and while I've been able to play around with necromancers, demons, goblins, and all kinds of other creatures in that time, I've somehow never had the opportunity to say hello to a vampire or werebeast. I don't know if the night creatures in my world are just shy, or if they completely died out at some point, but whatever the case may be, the lack of curses in my world has been an issue in the back of my mind for quite some time. I tried to tackle the problem in Fortress mode a year and a half ago by building a series of experiments designed to push dwarves to their mental limits in order to make them throw tantrums and topple temple statues devoted to their deities, which would get them cursed. Unfortunately, dwarves are fickle creatures that love to tantrum and topple when it'll annoy you, and then clam up and fall into a deep depression when you need them to get a little feisty. And so, after the failures of my uncursable fortress, I put the idea of replacing my missing night creatures on the back burner, until a couple weeks ago, when I was reading up on how werebeast and vampire curses could be passed on to other people, and decided that it was high time for me to boot up adventure mode and go on a couple cursed adventures to seed an exciting new generation of night creatures in amongst the dwarven civilizations of my world. I embarked on my first adventure as the dwarf Feb Sormine, and immediately set out looking to get cursed any which way as fast as possible. Because the simplest and easiest way to do that was to piss off a deity by repeatedly rolling a divination die, my mission took me towards the nearest human civilization, which was sure to have a town with a divinatory shrine in it somewhere. After a couple days of exploring, during which I toppled the statues of a handful of dud shrines, I finally found what I was looking for in the human town of Tempted Balanced, as part of a shrine to Ener the Fair. Rolling the 8-sided die for the first time, I was given a week of good luck. My second roll got me a warning that I shouldn't tempt fate, and then my third roll left me cursed to transform into a weremammoth during each full moon, which seemed like a pretty good fate to me. As a werebeast, all I had to do to pass on my curse to others was bite them hard enough to tear fat, skin, or muscle without killing them, which is pretty easy to do. So I made the return trip to the territory of the dwarven civilization I started in, the blockaded tower, and set myself up in a little dwarven burrow, ready to sleep through the couple days standing between me and the next full moon, and feeling pretty good about my curse spreading capabilities. Unfortunately, I made a slight miscalculation by planning to transform in such an enclosed space. When I woke up on the night of my weremammothing, I was able to bite a handful of dwarves in the immediate confusion, but then found myself unable to climb the stairs up and out of the burrow due to all the dwarves fighting back against me. None of them were actual threats, so I was eventually able to kill enough to climb out, but my plan to spread my curse kinda relied on me leaving my bite victims alive at the end of the night, so it wasn't really the start I was looking for. Fortunately, the game decided that it agreed with me, and crashed for the first of many times across my adventures to give me a second chance at a first bite. This time, I set up outside the door of an above-ground mound, waited for my transformation to take place, and then just popped my gargantuan head through the door to make all the dwarves inside hostile, before retreating back outside. A couple dwarves followed me out looking to fight, but after successfully biting the both of them, and maybe biting the second one a little too well, they had no way of keeping up to my supernaturally fast sprint speed as I made my way out of town. As I went from hillock to hillock, spreading my curse across the land, my technique for risk-free dining and dashing became more refined until, eventually, I was popping into mounds and biting dwarf arms so efficiently that it never felt like I was ever in any real danger of dying or killing my future weremammoths. Though it was still nice when I found myself in a burrow full of sleeping dwarves and could partake in some hassle-free biting. Eventually, after chomping my way through 34 dwarves across the 10 towns I visited, I found myself transformed back into Feb the Dwarf. With no obvious evidence tying me to the crimes I'd committed over the previous day, I ended my adventure by wandering my way up to the dwarven hillocks of Plankbell, which I hadn't yet had a chance to terrorize, and gifted them a surprise for the next full moon by retiring in their town. Spreading a weremammoth curse across 10 hillocks within the blockaded tower satisfied one half of my night creature replacement plan, but that still left another half to go, which led to me embarking on a second adventure as the human Huthra Lulled dresses to become a vampire and spread another curse across the land. My strategy for getting myself cursed as Hathra was the same as it was with Feb. Find a divination die and annoy whatever deity was associated with it. Only this time, I would be crossing my fingers for the cursed coin flip to come up in my favor. Fortunately, one of the first towns I explored had a shrine to Subi that had a divination die on the pedestal, and after rolling the die 3 times, I was given a week of bad luck, another warning, and a vampiric curse. As a vampire, I needed to get people to drink my tainted blood in order to pass on my curse, which was a little more involved than the simple biting I needed to do as a were-mammoth. And so, before I could get started, I had to raid a nearby tavern for some mugs and cups, and find an activity that would make me bleed without making me bleed out. Taking off my boots, gauntlets, and helm, and then jumping out of trees seemed promising, but I had a hard time finding a tree tall enough to do what I needed. Wandering around the woods until a pack of wolves attacked me definitely seemed like it would make me bleed, but it strayed way too far into lethal territory, and throwing my knife or sword into the air directly over my head seemed like a clever little trick, but dodging your own projectiles is apparently a little too easy. Eventually, I got tired of all my failed bloodletting attempts and climbed my way into the mountains to look for a suitably steep cliff. After days of wandering in a land without fast travel, I finally felt like I had found what I was looking for when I arrived at a steep hill with a rocky outcropping at the top from which I could jump. While my first leap down the mountain didn't leave me bleeding, it did enough damage for me to go back to the top and try again, until eventually I had a couple solid pools of blood to fill my cups with. Once my inventory had been filled with all the variations of blood and snow I could scoop up, I began the long crawl down the mountain towards the territory of the dwarven civilization, the Scarlet Shields, that lived in the northern part of my world. Unfortunately, when I arrived back in the land of the living, I discovered that all of the blood I had collected up on the mountain had frozen during the journey, meaning that I would have to head south to greener pastures and warmer civilizations if I wanted to give my blood to people. Along the way, I came across Lore Vale Basement, a prisoner whose militia captain was too busy vomiting into a bush to notice me asking her to come along with me as a travel companion. Together, we made our way around the mountain range and southwards towards some dwarven hillocks whose mounds I hoped wouldn't be so snowy. When we finally arrived in the hillocks of Dye Ordered, my mugs of blood had thawed and I could finally give Lore something to drink. After handing over my blood, she took a moment to tell me how much she appreciated my gift, and then downed all 3 units of tainted blood in one fell swoop. To confirm whether the drink had changed her in any way, I opened the Ask About Someone menu and looked through the options, which revealed that she was now listed as the Dwarf Vampire Lore Vale Basement. After dropping her off at the nearest mound and cancelling our agreement to travel together, I was free to bring my mugs of blood to whoever was willing to receive them, which it turned out was just about every dwarf I came across. I tried to steer clear of blockaded tower territory because I had already targeted them so thoroughly with my were-mammoth curse, but it seemed that every dwarven hillocks I came across from a different civilization was too cold for anything but blood popsicles, leaving me no choice but to double down on cursing a single civ. After traveling through half a dozen towns and handing out all 16 mugs of tainted blood I had filled, it was time for Hathra's adventure to come to an end. Much like with Feb, I wanted to retire her somewhere she hadn't yet had an opportunity to terrorize, but unlike with Feb, I had an unsated bloodlust to deal with first. I tried luring a drunk dwarf out of a drinking mound into the ruins of an old abandoned fortress to set up a dramatic final scene of me knocking him out and sucking his blood, but repeatedly smacking him in the head with the pommel of my sword led to a more explosive injury than I was looking for. In the end, I had to settle for creeping into a dwarven hillock late at night to suck the blood of 2 sleeping dwarves as my final act as Hathra, before I retired her in the dwarven hillocks of Page Problems. While I had gone to the effort of spreading were-mammoth and vampire curses to a number of dwarves within the blockaded tower, I wasn't actually 100% sure that what I did would trickle down to future fortresses. Reading the wiki page on historical figures definitely made it seem like future migrant waves would have a chance to pull from historical figures within the civilization, which now included all the vampires and were-mammoths that I created, but I still wanted to see proof of that in Fortress mode for myself. So I booted up Fortress mode, embarked as a part of the blockaded tower, and settled in to watch over the starting wagon for however long I needed to see the fruits of my labor. Fortunately, I didn't end up having to wait long. Just about 5 months into the life of the fortress, we got our first migrant wave, and soon after, when it was time for the next full moon, the dwarf Amos Lancergrass suddenly turned into a raging weremammoth and eviscerated the rest of my dwarves. With all the proof I needed that my night creatures had finally been replaced in hand, I retired my fortress a few months shy of the year 300. While the first 300 years of my world were kind to the blockaded tower, and I built some of my favorite fortresses under their banner, I have a feeling that they might be entering a period of extended hardship, and I'm looking forward to taking part in it. But for now, thanks for watching, an extra thank you to those of you who support me on Patreon, and I'll see you next time.